Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to A Talking Point. My name is Fahraaz Patel. I would like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, TSTV channel 347. Since October the 7th, 2023, Israel has killed close to, if not over 52,000 Palestinians, with the majority of it being women and children. The International Court of Justice, just this week, is hearing arguments from various nations as to why Israel is not abiding by international law. Israel, who continues to block aid to enter from the Rafah border, and the fact that two advisories that were given by the ICJ last year for them to stop its attacks on Gaza and, of course, attacks on the occupied West Bank, and also for it to withdraw from these territories, has not been adhered to. The ceasefire, which was brokered between Hamas and Israel, was, of course, broken by Israel in the middle parts of Ramadan. This has now seen an intensification of the attacks that are happening. What now happens? What is the fallout with regards to this new wave of attacks by Israel as the genocide takes an even more deadlier turn? Today, my guest is no stranger when it comes to Palestinian advocacy, the fight for Palestinian rights, and her voice has been heard all over the world. She is a former Palestinian Liberation Organization spokesperson and a lawyer who, of course, speaks a lot on the rights of Palestinians to be adhered to. I'd like to welcome Diana Buttu. Diana, assalamu alaikum, and shukran so much for making the time for us. We really appreciate it.
Wa alaikum assalam, and it's my pleasure to be with you. I always say that South Africa feels like my second home, because whenever I'm in South Africa, I feel that there's a love and a camaraderie that I don't need to, that is unparalleled, it's unmatched about in any place around the world. So thank you for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, and you're always welcome here, Diana. Diana, let's go back pre-October the 7th, 2023. I think when one speaks of education, it becomes imperative on this, because when you look at Zionist lobby groups, those who just completely turn a blind eye to even the pre-Nakba, it's easy for them to say, well, this all started on October the 7th. But how important was the contextualization of history prior to October the 7th in really understanding the deadly aspect of the occupation?
You know, if you only look at one specific day, then what you're doing is you're engaging in a process of dehumanization. And what's happened is that since 1948, since the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, and even during the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the only way that the Nakba could have taken place was through the dehumanization of Palestinians. Because that's the only way you can live in a place where you've kicked out 75% of the population. The only way that the Zionists could live literally in the houses of Palestinians was through a process of dehumanization. And so when we look at just one day and on what happened on one day, what we're doing is we're ignoring all of the harm that Israel has caused and all the violence that Israel has perpetrated against Palestinians from 1948 until the current day. And that is really, that's the height of dehumanization. To somehow say that one day means more, and the lives that were lost on one day are more important than all of the lives that Israel took during all of those years, again, is the height of dehumanization. And we shouldn't be engaging it. And that's precisely why the Zionists want to focus on this one day, is because they believe in the process of dehumanization. They believe in this idea of Jewish supremacy. They believe in the idea that their lives are more valuable than the hundreds of thousands of lives that they've killed and the millions of people whose lives they have disrupted over the course of the past 77 years.
Diana, what's interesting is the changing of this actual narrative. Because prior to that, you get the labels of Hamas equals terrorist. There's two sides to the story. There's Israel's right to exist, but within that existing, they would need to, as you say, kick out 70% of the Palestinian population. What we are seeing now is that through cases like the ICJ, and we're going to touch on that later on, through educational aspects, for example, through even cinema or documentaries, there has to be that change of the narrative. And we're seeing it now, aren't we? That those who were once blind can now actually see.
Yes, yeah. And I firmly believe that once you see, you cannot unsee. So yes, the mask is off, and it's become very apparent what Israel has always been about, which is about ethnically cleansing Palestine. It's about committing genocide. That's what it's always been about. The problem, of course, is that what does it take for the world to finally see it? And yes, the narrative is changing, and it's important for the narrative to change. And at the same time, it's changing only because Palestinians are paying a very, very, very heavy price. And it's because it's so deep-rooted in this process of dehumanization. It's so deep-rooted in this process of Islamophobia that it shouldn't take this long. I'm happy that minds are being changed. I'm happy that the mask is off. But now's the time for people to do something about it.
Diana, we talk of the need for activism. We speak of that necessity. But what we have seen throughout this period, this 1.5 year period, is many Jewish groups who have come out and said, not in my name. I want to touch on what had happened this week in New York City. The far right, a racist representative of the Knesset, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's in New York, if I stand to be corrected, he may have departed. Really he departed, uttering words of what can only be genocide rhetoric. And then you get supporters of the Zionist lobby groups attacking many Jewish citizens of the United States who say, well, there's going to be no genocide, not in our name. So when we speak of the masks being off, the mask is right over there, where even within Judaism, there's a clear split between the Jews who want to support Palestinian solidarity as to those who are Zionists who want to say quite clearly, well, we want this genocide to continue because that's just what we have been told, as they would say, 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, there's always been a split within the Jewish community, and that split has certainly become exacerbated over the course of the past 1.5 years, but there has always been a split. And the reason that there has been a split is that it's important for people to understand that Zionism replaced Judaism as the religion of the Jews, particularly in the United States. So the idea of being Jewish in the United States had less to do with the actual doctrinal religious texts and had more to do with being a Zionist. And now, because of that, this is now why we're seeing this split, is that people are now peeling away and saying, Zionism is not my religion. I'm Jewish, but I'm not a Zionist. And that split has always been there. I mean, there have always been people who have been on the right side of history in every context around the world. And there have been people who are Jewish who have long stood against Zionism and have been longstanding anti-Zionist. And there's some who are slowly coming to realize what exactly is happening. We need to embrace them. We need to meet them. We need to encourage them. And part of it has been that for them, I think the horrors of what they're seeing is what's awoken them. Because if it's only by seeing and feeling what Israel's doing now that you can understand the logical conclusion, because the only logical conclusion to Zionism is precisely what they're doing to Palestinians in Gaza now, which is genocide. And so people are waking up and saying, not in my name. Now, not all of the groups are anti-Zionist, but it is important for us to recognize those groups who are and to continue to work with those ones.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Diana Buttu. We're going to be discussing the role of media and how it has negatively and positively played out for the solidarity of Palestinians since the start of the genocide in October 2023. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. I'm in conversation with Diana Buttu, Palestinian lawyer, and of course, former spokesperson of the Palestine Liberation Organization. As we speak currently, Al Jazeera and many other foreign media houses have been banned from going ahead and covering the genocide that is happening in Gaza from an Israeli perspective. Of course, Israel themselves have banned Al Jazeera from its territories and, of course, within the occupied West Bank. Diana, when looking at the way the media has portrayed this, I think a lot of us have seen the brutality of the Palestinian people, not only from maybe an Al Jazeera perspective, but a lot of it on social media. When you take that into context, that has really changed since maybe the first war, which broke out in 2008, then the other one in 2014, and maybe one can say 2021, and the current genocide that is happening right now has given us a perspective from really looking at things from a social media perspective.
Yes, I think that there's two things here. One is I think it's important to look at mainstream media, mainstream corporate media. And I can say very sadly, with confidence, that the attacks that Israel is perpetrating in Gaza would not have been possible had it not been for a lot of this mainstream corporate media. And what do I mean by that? I will never forget nor forgive that on October the 17th of 2023, when Israel bombed the Baptist hospital, the Ma'madani hospital, that a number of media outlets, and by the way, Human Rights Watch, rushed to come to Israel's defense and claim that somehow it was Palestinians who bombed their own hospital. That then paved the way for the bombing of the Shifa hospital, which then paved the way for the bombing of all 36 of the hospitals in Gaza. Had there been a critical mainstream media, I don't think that Israel would have been able to get away with it. But yet what we've seen over the course of the past year and a half has been the questioning of Palestinians, claiming that somehow they're not journalists when they are, the doubting of everything from the numbers of people killed to the ways in which Israel has gunned down, including paramedics and doctors, the way that they've killed these paramedics and doctors. And all of the elements of this genocide have not been questioned. They've been sort of accepted by the mainstream media. At the same time, people are turning increasingly, as you said, to social media. But we cannot just rely on social media, because social media at its core is not social. It's actually antisocial. You follow those pages that you want to follow. You follow those accounts that you want to follow. But the vast majority of people are not following it. And that's the point. They create these algorithms so that you and I and people who are watching the show see what's happening. But not everybody is. And so we also need to be very well aware that we can't just simply rely on social media, that we need to be pushing mainstream media, and we need to also be tuning into some of the independent media and alternative media that is out there, because these are the people who are reflecting more of the truth and who are taking these images from Gaza and showing them to the world.
Diana, what's interesting is that when you watch the mainstream media, a lot of the claims of the babies being burnt by Hamas, till today we're still waiting for that actual evidence. The claims of rape that was perpetrated, or what the Western media had said it was perpetrated at the time, still no proof. And of course, one of it, when you look at the hostages that were being released by Hamas back to Israel, they looked as if they came out brand new humans. With those three in itself, that has really debunked any supposed narrative from Western media that there's a sense of barbaric behavior by Palestinians. There's a sense of them being the ultimate bad guys in this current world of deception. So much has changed, hasn't it? When you look at those three events by itself, and there's so much more in just how the fact that media in its way from a Western perspective has really been shunted away in the way they've reported on this genocide.
There's two things here, and both of them are important. The first is that a lot of these claims have been used in order to get people to accept genocide. So the idea of the babies, etc. I mean, all of that was used to justify genocide. And let's be clear, there's nothing that can justify genocide. But the second element to it is that what we've seen is we've seen a real humanization of Israelis, and yet no equivalent humanization when it comes to Palestinians. For example, as people have been talking about the issue of rape, we do know that there are documented cases of Israeli soldiers raping Palestinian women and men, and that they've admitted to using rape as a method of torture. Yet that doesn't seem to be reported. The other thing is that when we see that when we saw the Israelis being released, we knew their names, we knew their hopes, we knew their dreams, we knew their fears, and it's fine to humanize people. The problem is that they don't humanize Palestinians. So we didn't hear about right now the more than 2,000 Palestinians that Israel has admitted to holding without trial, without charge, in its torture chambers. We don't know their names. We don't know their fears. We don't know their hopes. We don't know their loves. We haven't heard anything about the children that Israel released. These were children that shouldn't have been held in the first place. We haven't heard any of the stories of the men and the women who endured this torture, this rape. We're not hearing about the families of when they're looking for charred babies, as they claim. We actually have charred babies in Gaza, and nobody's talking about this. And so the problem is that when only one side is looked at, and it's only the one side that's looked at in order to humanize or to demonize, it means that what you're doing is you're humanizing some and demonizing others in order to further dehumanize them. And that's the part that we have to push back against. So I think it's very important for us to recognize that all of these rumors were put forward in order to perpetrate genocide. And the lack of humanization of Palestinians, the lack of telling their stories, is yet again another one of these processes of dehumanization. And that has to stop.
Diana, I want to go to the White House. And of course, Joe Biden was the president when, of course, the genocide had started on October the 7th, 2023. Yeah. It's probably been even worse now under Donald Trump, where, quite frankly, it's another blank check that has been given to Tel Aviv, and it's quite frankly, do whatever you need to do. Maybe on this occasion, it's a US president that is openly potentially saying, do it, it's fine, you have our full support. I've seen Benjamin Netanyahu come to the White House and practically say whatever he wants to say, do whatever he wants to do, and there's a sense of impunity that is being occurred there. I know it's to exaggerate saying Washington is a full ally of Israel, but in the manner that they've become this ally, it's quite disturbing, isn't it, Diana? And I know you've mentioned it so many times on social media and so many times in your interviews. It's just that Washington tells Tel Aviv, do what you have to do to make sure that your quote-unquote security is intact.
It's worse than them telling the Israelis. They're fully complicit in this genocide. This genocide, and the Israelis know it, would not be possible without U.S. weaponry, without U.S. support, without US diplomatic support, without US financial support, without US bullying. And what do I mean by that? Israel doesn't have enough weapons. The weapons supply would run out in 2 weeks. It doesn't have the financial support to sustain the economy. This is why the economy is in shambles. It doesn't have the diplomatic support. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The world is against Israel. And so this isn't just the Israeli genocide that's being perpetrated against Palestinians. It's an Israeli-American genocide that's being perpetrated against Palestinians. So Israeli-American partners in genocide. And inside Israel, the debate has always been who calls the shots. Is it the United States who calls the shots, or is it Israel who calls the shots? Yeah, this is always this debate that Israelis are having. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. For Palestinians, it doesn't matter. What we see is that they are in alliance with one another, and their alliance has become deadly. Now, I'm somebody who does not believe that there are no other powers around the world. I do think that there are other powers around the world. I think that we can have a global alliance against genocide. And why that hasn't happened is what's perplexing me. We have seen, and I have to say, especially because I'm speaking to you in South Africa, I'm eternally grateful for the support that South Africa has given Palestinians. And it's a true solidarity, one that predates we were in solidarity with anti-apartheid activists in South Africa and vice versa. And truly grateful for the efforts that South Africa has led in trying to take on this case. And at the same time, South Africa has set such a wonderful example that I'm left disheartened that while South Africa kicked open the door, nobody else has followed through.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Diana Buttu. We're going to be touching on the role of resistance against Israeli occupation across the Palestinian territories. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. Now, last week, we had a panel discussion with regards to Hamas applying to the UK courts to have themselves disbanded as a quote-unquote terrorist organization. Now, this comes at the back of a current ceasefire negotiation deals where there are calls for Hamas to disarm themselves, and it's coming from within the Palestinian territories, from the West Bank, from the Palestinian Authority leader, Mahmoud Abbas. Diana, I just wanted to get your take on Abbas's call for Hamas to disarm themselves.
It's not at all surprising. And the reason that it's not at all surprising is that you have to both look at Mahmoud Abbas's history as well as the role that the Palestinian Authority plays. So let's look at the role that the Palestinian Authority plays. The Palestinian Authority was supposed to be in its own government, but it's effectively been the security subcontractor to Israel. What that means is that the Israelis tell the Palestinian Authority to crack down on people, and it does. And this kind of defies logic, and it actually defies international law, because under international law, it's the occupied people, meaning the Palestinians, that are supposed to be being protected, not the occupier, Israel, that's being protected. In fact, this was affirmed in 2004 by the ICJ. It was affirmed again in 2024 by the ICJ, in which the court says that it's the occupied, meaning the Palestinians, who are entitled to protection, not the other way around, not the occupier who is entitled to protection. And so Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, in his role as the Palestinian Authority, he's flipped international law on its head. And he is saying it's our role to be providing security to the occupier, which makes absolutely no sense. And therefore, this is why he is calling on Hamas. At the same time, you have to look at his own personal history, where the ways in which he's gotten credibility, not from Palestinians, but from the West, is by being the person who claims to be supporting nonviolence. And yet here we are after 20 years of being in a process with him as the president. I've neither seen him lead nonviolent resistance, nor have I seen him lead or do anything to protect Palestinians or support Palestinians. And so when you look at his statements, it's as though he simply doesn't understand law and he doesn't understand history.
Yes.
Because remember, in 1982, the PLO was asked to give up its weapons and to leave Beirut. And they did. They left Beirut and they gave up their weapons. They went to Tunis. And it was less than 2 weeks later that we had the major massacres of Sabra and Shatila when backed by the Israelis, the militias, the SLA militias in Lebanon slaughtered Palestinians. So, I mean, the fact that he is saying to Palestinians, remain helpless, just give up everything, let the Israelis come in and bulldoze you, means that he neither understands history, nor does he understand law. And he certainly doesn't understand politics.
And that's the thing, Diana. When you look at law, you've hit the nail on the head. The occupied has a right to resist, and they have a right to resist from an armed perspective. This is just Hamas following that right now. We see, of course, within many of the occupied territories of the West Bank, the Al-Quds Brigade, Islamic Jihad, they're also taking the fight to the Israeli occupation forces in that part. It's law. But it seems that, of course, the West, with its narrative, would say, well, no, they're classified as terrorist organizations, or, in their words, Islamist jihad group. But when understanding the law states quite frankly that if you have a gun pointed to you, that you have every right to say, I'm going to point my gun back at you. This is just Hamas or any other resistance group exercising its duty when it comes to international law. And this really highlights the role of resistance movements, doesn't it? That it has to be done in order to make sure that the occupier is driven out of the land so that the occupied can have its freedoms as per United Nations rulings.
Look, I think it's important for people to understand that there are no people around the world who are going to sit by idly as they're being denied their freedom. It hasn't happened in history, nor will it happen right now. And unless people understand that people will do what it takes in order to get their freedom, unless there's that recognition, then we're forever going to be in this really silly and broken narrative of who can resist, who can't resist, and so on. And not only that, it's once you understand that people will do what they need to do in order to gain their freedom, that the world will then understand that rather than beating up on the people who are demanding their freedom, maybe we should be focusing on the people who are denying freedom. And that's the fundamental problem here, is that everybody's always looking at the Palestinian response rather than what it is that Israel is doing. And I think our focus really has to be more on Israel. Now, that said, I think when thinking about the issue of resistance, we also have to think about time, places, be strategic, and so on. And that's a conversation for a different day and at a different time. But all to say that I think that the obsession with people making sure that Palestinians are somehow quiet is the wrong angle. And I think instead we have to be focusing on making sure that Israel's held to account for denying freedom for all these years.
You know, what's interesting, until 2008, the United States had Nelson Mandela on its terrorist list. And I always think to that, I mean, it took them, 14 years to actually take them, actually 18 years to take that out.
18 years.
So within that just shows that anything that is seen as a resistance, we saw that, of course, with the Irish fighting Great Britain for it to have its freedom. And the history is quite long, that resistance movements are needed. And you've hit the nail spot on, that it can't go quiet. It has to be there in order to make sure that the message is delivered quite clearly. And that's why there's so much of parallels, isn't it, Diana, drawn from South Africa to Palestine, in the way, of course, the MK Mkhonto weSizwe, which was the armed wing of the ANC, had to take the fight to the National Party of South Africa in order to make sure that freedom was granted here in South Africa.
There are a lot of parallels, looking from, the formal beginning of apartheid in 1948 to the formal beginning of apartheid in South Africa in 1948 to the formal beginning of apartheid in Palestine in 1948. The connections that existed between Israel and the apartheid South Africa regime, and those ties were strong and very well documented. And of course, the ties that have existed between these anti-imperialist, anti-apartheid movements, between the ANC, between the PLO, and between other organizations around the world as well. All of these are connected because we went through an era of colonialism, and of course, an era of decolonization. That process has not stopped. It has not stopped in Palestine. It got stopped, but it has to be picked up and has to continue. All of this to say that what I've seen over time is that the West seems to change the rules of the game, and what was okay for them when they were gaining their independence, in particular in the United States, seems to be something that is not okay for them when other people are trying to gain their independence. And these are the structures that we have to break down, that we have to really spotlight, and we have to call out for being so hypocritical.
After the break, I wrap up my conversation with Diana Buttu. We're going to be talking South Africa's case against Israel at the ICJ. How much of a milestone did that mark in South Africa's relationship with Palestine? Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. December 29th, 2023, it will be a day that would have further strengthened the relationship between South Africa and Palestine. It was the day South Africa had launched a case against Israel at the International Court of Justice for its genocide that is currently happening in Gaza. Of course, late in January, when the deliberations were given by the ICJ judges, it was found that there would be prima facie evidence of genocide that is occurring in Gaza. Diana, when it was December the 29th, I had to go to your socials because I saw a post where it was really a sense of appreciation. And in your role with the Palestine Liberation Organization and its history with South Africa, with the ANC, you just felt that there was a coming together of two organizations, of course, one being a liberation organization at the time, and of course the PLO, who had then been still fighting for Palestinian rights. It really was something of a togetherness of unity, wasn't it? And this quote from the late President Nelson Mandela, where he says, South Africa cannot be free until Palestine is free. How much does that quote resonate with you as a Palestinian?
I began my remarks this evening saying to you that how appreciative I am of South Africa and how I feel very much at home every time I visit and every time I'm interviewed as well. And that it's not just that quote, because that's just a quote and it's part of a longer quote. But it's the sense and the sentiment that I feel from South Africa and from South Africans that there's a true love and a true camaraderie there and true solidarity. That day, the day that the case was filed, and I knew it was going to be filed, was for me the day that I finally felt seen. And the days of the oral arguments were the days that I finally truly felt seen. And I say this because at that point in time, we had been going through 4 months of genocide. And 4 months of Israel attacking daily each and every place in Gaza, no place safe, attacking hospitals, attacking schools, attacking medical clinics, going after journalists, going after my friends, um, uh, homes, shelters, UN buildings, you name it. Everything was a target for them. And hearing the oral arguments and seeing the case that they pulled together was the first time that I finally had the chance to step back and say, Israel did all of this to us in the span of 4 months, and at least somebody saw it, and that was South Africa.
Yeah.
So for me, it's come full circle because, as I mentioned, there has always been connections with anti-apartheid struggle and the PLO and Palestinians. And that struggle has come full circle, where true solidarity is not just about being one-sided, but about making sure that that circle is closed completely.
Diana, I interviewed a couple of months ago Dr. Naledi Pandor. I'm sure that's somebody that you would know. She was our former,
course. I admire,
yes, a former international relations minister. And I asked her, I said, when you and your team were sitting, what was it that went through the thought process? And she could only mention one word: morality. That's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah. It's morality, but it's also courage. Because they have not just the morality, but the courage to take on what is undoubtedly going to be a lot of repercussions, both by Israel and by the United States and by all of the countries that the U.S. is going to line up to bully against South Africa. And so I'm grateful to her, and I thank her, and I've thanked her personally, because it takes a lot of courage to stand up to the Zionists. We do it every day. We as Palestinians do it every day. And to finally have somebody also standing with us was huge. It was momentous. Now, I think it's important to put things in perspective. South Africa paved the way. And I don't expect South Africa to be the only country that is taking on this case, because genocide is not just about South Africa. It binds every single state. And so I thank South Africa for paving the way, for kicking open those doors. And it's now up to every country around the world to continue to do the same. This isn't just a fight, South Africa supporting Palestinians. This is a fight for humanity. It's a fight for whether there is a legal system or not. It's a fight for justice. And it's a fight for us to really stand up and say what we believe. When at the time when the Holocaust was being perpetrated, there were people around the world who claimed that they didn't know what was happening. And there were people who were around the world who chose to do nothing. In this case, there is no way that people can say they didn't know. And so all that we're left with is people who are choosing to do nothing, which means that they're truly not free. The time that we are free is now. And this is the time where people have to show that they actually believe in a system of humanity.
Diana, yesterday when, of course, South Africa had delivered its deliberations at the ICJ, and it's, of course, a continuation of the legal team from South Africa doing it. I'd spoken to a law for Palestine. Her name is Diana Patel. And I'd asked her this question, and I'm going to ask you this question. Impunity, when does it stop? When does the red line stop for Israel to maintain this impunity? Because when you look at what the ICJ had delivered last year, they still have not adhered to it. Surely it has to come to an end, isn't it? When, though, is of course that big question.
Fahraaz, so I've been, it's starting. And I think that that's the important thing, is the Israelis want us to be fearful and to lose hope. And I refuse to be afraid, and I refuse to lose hope. I want to explain a few things that have been happening lately. Think about 2 years ago, or think about, almost 3 years ago when the World Cup was happening. Israel was allowed to travel to Qatar. It was allowed to travel anywhere around the world. Israelis were allowed to travel anywhere. They were viewed nicely, and they were accepted in everywhere, everywhere you can think of. Today, that's not the case. Today, we're seeing that there are groups that are going after Israelis and saying, we will not accept you if you've participated in the genocide in Gaza. We're seeing that countries are now calling for the expulsion of Israel in sports events. We're seeing that teams are refusing to play with Israel. We're seeing that people are saying that Israel should be kicked out of Eurovision. This is, mainstream countries. It's happening. It's happening. It is not happening as fast as we need it to be. But Israel will forever be stained as being a country that carries out genocide. Just in the same way that other genocidal countries have had that similar stain. There is no way that they can go back. And that's the part that scares Israel the most. They always want to be treated as normal. And the world has now seen that Israel is not normal. And that is what's bothering them. Is it fast enough? Certainly not. But if there's one thing I believe in people power. It might not come. We might not see that states are going to very quickly act. They didn't act in the case of South Africa either. But people did. And that's what I believe in. I think that we have people power. We have a love that Israel will never know in its lifetime. And that is what sustains us. And that's what's ultimately going to make us victorious.
Diana, on it being speedy enough for any potential sanctions or a total boycott of Israel, how much of a role does the United States, need to play? The reason why I ask this, they sit on the Security Council. They have vetoed more than 4 to 5 ceasefire votes that have been brought to the UN Security Council. It gives Israel the blank checks. It allows them to continue this impunity. How much of a role does the United States now really play in allowing Israel to do this? I know I asked you this earlier on, but from a political perspective, the fact that Netanyahu, who is a wanted criminal according to the International Criminal Court, can waltz into Washington whenever he wants, is the United States this big stumbling block?
Oh, absolutely. And you know this better than I do, which is that if you look at how apartheid in South Africa fell, the last countries to support an apartheid South Africa were 3. Israel,
yes,
no surprise. Britain, no surprise. And number 3, of course, was the United States.
Yes.
So I fully expect that the U.S. is going to be the last country. I don't expect that it's going to be the first country. That said, we do have people power. And it's that people power that is going to sustain us. And it's that people power that is ultimately going to hold Israel to account. It might not be happening in the next month or 2, but I firmly believe that there is no way that they can go back to the way it was before. And nobody views Israel in the same way any longer. It doesn't. There's been a sea change.
Diana, one final question. As a Palestinian, since the Nakba, resistance, a spirit of fighting has been part and parcel of your DNA. When you look at Gaza, when you look at the mothers, the women, they're steadfast. They're not giving up.
Yeah.
When you look at the journalist, they're not giving up. When you look at the child in the occupied West Bank who picks up that stone to tell the Israeli army, I'm fighting you. You're not going to do anything. This is my land. When you see the young babies who, as young as 6 months, as young as a year, saying there's a smile on their face, it speaks of a resistance, doesn't it? It speaks of patience, perseverance, determination. What makes a Palestinian have those qualities that says, this is my land and I'm not leaving it no matter what?
Look, I don't think we should be lionizing Palestinians or exceptionalizing them. I think this exists in every single person around the world. There is a desire to be free, and we are not going to give up in any way, shape, or form. In the case of Palestine, though, there's a couple of other things. One is that people have a deep faith, they have Iman.
Yes.
And in that deep faith and Iman, they firmly believe that if you follow the straight path, if you follow the path that has been given to us, that this is the path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us, that there is a reason that this is happening to us. So it's Iman. But there's also another thing as well, which is we know from our experience just how brutal the Zionists can be. And because we know this, we've prepared ourselves for it. We've prepared ourselves for it. But I think overall, we really need to understand that we can't just rely on Palestinian sumud, Palestinian resilience, Palestinian Iman. Palestinians need support as well. And this comes from making sure that Israel is held to account, that Israel is boycotted, that Israel has sanctions placed on it, that Israelis are not treated as normal, that they're not allowed to travel around the world. It also comes from making sure that our brothers and sisters have the support that they need as they're struggling. So I think it's important for us to recognize that this is a global struggle and that we're all in this together.
Diana, I wish we had more time to continue this conversation, but shukran so much for making the time for us. We really appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
That's Diana Buttu, a Palestinian lawyer and former spokesperson of the Palestine Liberation Organization, discussing a whole range of topics when it comes to its country, the current genocide that is happening in Gaza, and of course, the solidarity from a global perspective. That's all we have for you here on Talking Point. From myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.